Hey, Cliff Ravenscraft here. I was just a guest on Eli's Meet Cool People podcast, and I got to say, I really enjoyed the conversational approach and just the curiosity that Eli brings to the table. It was a great experience. Loved it. 10 out of 10.
My name's Eli Delaney, and I have the honor of meeting some pretty cool people. These are the entrepreneurs, the artists, the creatives, the game changers that are making a positive impact in the people that they meet. And I'm a firm believer that the people that you meet can get you anywhere you want to go. And this show is my way of sharing them with you. It's my way of also helping you meet cool people. All right, welcome back to another episode of Meet Cool People. My name's Eli Delaney, and today's guest, Cliff Ravenscraft. He was introduced to me by Misty Gilbert. If you haven't listened to my show with her, go back and listen to her. It's probably 4 or 5 episodes ago. We had a great conversation. We ended up getting on a call, had some pretty amazing stuff. Then we jumped on another call where he was actually helping me with some stuff. And I was like, okay, yeah, we need to definitely have this dude on the show. So let me tell you a little bit about him. He is a master business strategy and mindset coach. His focus is to help you break free from any belief or behaviors that are holding you back and from living the life of your dreams and doing the work you feel called to do the most in this world. So with that, Cliff, thanks so much for coming and hanging out today.
Eli, I am delighted to be here. Thank you so much for having me as a guest on this very special program that you're doing.
Awesome. So what did I not say about your intro? I always like to kind of give a little bit of more history. Where did you get started in this journey that you're in today?
Well, I was born in... No, I'm just kidding.
You know, a lot of people don't reference that whole joke from the Steve Martin back in the days of SNL. Do you? You know, I bet you would, but not a whole lot of people do anymore.
I love Steve Martin, especially The Jerk. That was one of my favorite stand-up albums when I was a kid. Anyway, there's all sorts of fun stuff that I could talk about, but what I'll say is I started podcasting as a hobby in December 2005. Fell in love with it, started reaching tens of thousands of people, then eventually hundreds of thousands of people with just a microphone in our home in Northern Kentucky. And as a result of that and the feedback that we were getting, people say, man, this is really starting to shift the way that I see the world. Can I ask you questions? Lots of questions were coming in. And as a result of that, more podcasts were being launched because they were asking me questions that were not related to the topic of the podcast we already had. And the same questions were coming up over and over again for various different topics. So I had various different shows. Long story short, after 2 years, I made the decision to go into podcasting, content creation, full-time as my career. Had a ton of people ask me, how can I launch a podcast? And I started up a little side business, consulting and coaching around the launch of a podcast. Started a brand called Podcast Answer Man. For 12 years, I helped more than 40,000 people launch a podcast. And yeah, that's how I got started in this world.
40,000 people helping them start their podcast, which is insane. I remember back in the day with my first podcast when nobody really even knew what a podcast was. And it's always entertaining when we look at nowadays. People don't understand where the term podcast came from, an iPod, because nobody knows what those are in today's world.
Yeah, it was a fun world. Back then, well, you didn't have to have an iPod. That's the one thing. But we did have these MP3 devices, and none of them had Wi-Fi connections, or most of them did not. And you had to download MP3 files off of the internet and then sync them to your portable devices. It was a fun time back then.
Oh yeah, I had one of the big old classic ones that, you know, I think I still have it stored somewhere because I just have a hard time getting rid of it. But that thing, I beat that thing up, had that thing for years.
Yeah, mine was the first time I had a portable media device like that was a Creative Zen, which was a knockoff of the iPod back in the day.
I think I had one of those before I got the iPod. Actually, if I remember correctly, I did have one of those. I'd forgot about that. Awesome.
Oh man, good days.
So you've done a ton of stuff in the podcasting world, but you've shifted away from that into more in that mindset coach kind of stuff. Tell us how that journey kind of came to be.
Well, it came as a result of finding out that most people who say they want a podcast, they really aren't clear about who they are and what it is that they are actually wanting to do in the world. And so, as the podcast answer man back in the day, one of my first questions is, tell me, why do you want to have a podcast, and how will you know that you have succeeded in whatever it is that you want to accomplish with your podcast? And I was absolutely shocked how many people did not have the answer to those two questions. And so, while I had all the technical skills and knowledge of helping them on the technical aspects of launching a podcast, that part was easy. I mean, if that's all anybody needed, I could help somebody record and publish their first podcast episode within 45 minutes of me meeting them. So that's all it would take. But what I recognize is most people need some clarity. Who am I? What value do I bring to the world? Who do I want to speak to? What is my message? What's important to me? What does success look like? What do I want to create? And how do I overcome all of the fears that I have about what would happen if I got all of the things I want in this world? And as a result of noticing that so many people are struggling with mindset and fears, and that's keeping them from taking the actions needed to get what they actually do want once they discover and get clarity about that, then it's like, okay, this is great. I'm off to the races. However, most people who didn't have the mindset kind of coaching, those people, sure, they got all the technical details, and they recorded and got over the sound of their funny voice or something like that. And by the end of working with me, I noticed that so many people who hired me just for the technical aspects, no mindset coaching included. It's like, listen, Cliff, stick to the details. I only got said number of dollars. I can get mindset woo-woo stuff anywhere. Just tell me what I need to know. And I'm like, okay. Those people hardly ever made it past their third, fourth, or fifth episode. And the reason why is because they had all sorts of fears. They had all sorts of limiting beliefs. And quite frankly, they thought what they wanted was fame or lots of money. And they thought that the podcast was going to give those two things to them instantly. And they gave up pretty much right out of the gate.
Yeah, and I've seen that. What is the stats? It's like most most podcasts don't get past like episode 10 or something like that. And it always blows me away because like this show is still really new. We just launched this back in November of this last year. I'm at 23 episodes right now. Got a couple in the can ready to go. And it just amazes me how some people don't stick with it that long. And it's like, this is such a cool medium to have amazing conversations. And I think for me personally, it's like this podcast is a way for me to do exactly what the name of the podcast is: meet cool people, having good conversations. So I'm not looking at it as a monetary tool. And if that happens, great. My last podcast, that's what happened, is I ended up getting a ton of business behind the scenes, but I never advertised anything. I didn't pitch anything. It was the guests. They're like, I need some help with something. Do you know somebody? I'm like, actually, yeah, we can help you with that. I just don't talk about it much. It was pure coincidence. But I go into this show with the idea of, I just want to have cool conversations. That's what I'm after. And the cool thing is that it relieves a lot of the pressure. I know people that go into it with I'm going to look for sponsorships and things like that. And it adds a lot of pressure and takes away from the fun side of it.
Well, that may be true. I will say there are plenty of people who go into it for the monetization. They go into it for the finding a sponsor. And I think the difference is whether or not you have clarity about what it is that you want to create. And so if that's what you want, then you can have a lot of fun building that process. You may have some uninformed ideas about how successful it will be right out of the gate, given what your circumstance is compared to what the people you might compare yourself to. That's where I see a lot of the not so fun parts of it happen for a lot of people. But with that being said, I will share with you. So I have 52 podcasts that I have produced. I have well over, I think I should stop saying over 4,700. By now, I'm sure it's over 4,800 podcast episodes. I put out still today somewhere between 3 to 7 pieces of content every single week. So I love creating content, and some of the podcasts that I do, I created them for no other reason than to generate new business, to create new income. I'll give you a perfect example. I created a podcast called Upgrade Your Peer Group, The Power of Mastermind Groups. You can find this at upgradeyourpeergroup.com. And it only has 6 podcast episodes as of today. It probably will never have any more than 6 episodes ever. I created them all within a couple of months of each other. I was thinking I might write a book on the power of mastermind groups and having paid mastermind groups and how to start a paid mastermind group, or what, my thoughts and experiences with paid mastermind groups. But I decided I don't want to write a book. This was before ChatGPT and all the generative AI stuff came out. I could probably go write a book in a weekend now. But back then, I'm like, I like talking. So I actually created what I consider to be like an unedited, but still very impactful 6-episode or 6 chapters of an audiobook called Upgrade Your Peer Group, The Power of Mastermind Groups. I published that, and within 6 months, it generated $90,000. And all I did was put a call to action at the end of all 6 episodes that if you want to join my mastermind group for full-time self-employed business owners, head over to nextlevelmastermind.info, which, there's an annual fee to be a part of that, and X number of people times that's how many people joined as a result of listening to that podcast. And I only ever promoted it 3 times.
Wow, that is cool. It's kind of cool to be creative of different ways to look at it, because most of the time, like for me personally, I'm looking at the podcast as a tool that I'm going to plan on doing for at least a year, if not multiple years. My last podcast, I think, was 2 years or something like that. And I decided it was just time to put it on the back burner. But, with that idea of having a podcast that's a smaller purpose, but being more intentional about what you're doing with it, that's pretty cool. So with what you're doing right now, just give me an example of what does a typical client walking in the door, when they come to you, where are they at?
Well, a typical client is somebody who is already very successful in their entrepreneurial journey. They have overcome lots of obstacles. They've failed many times, but they're routinely able to generate, let's just say, somewhere between $20,000 to $50,000 a month, every single month, without fail in their business. They've been doing this for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And quite frankly, they thought without any shadow of a doubt, they're far more profitable, they're far more wealthy, they're far more successful in business than they ever dreamed they would have been when they first started the business. Yet, my average client comes to me because they still lack peace. They still lack contentment. They still lack satisfaction. They still lack fulfillment. They feel like, man, I still haven't found what I'm looking for, if you will. Pardon me for using the phrase from the U2 song. They still haven't found that contentment, that fulfillment. They thought, I just believe if I could just leave my day job and start this business and have control over my schedule, then I will be happy. And then they actually have that. But then the money's kind of ebbs and flows for a while. And it's like, if I could just get to this level of income, then I know that I will finally have that level of certainty that everything's going to be fine. I won't have so much anxiety and overwhelm, except for the fact that they finally reach whatever that is. Let's just say it's $10,000 a month consistently, and their expenses have stayed pretty much the same. And I'm like, and then they hit that. But then they're like, but man, okay, so 10,000 wasn't what it took. If I could just get to 20,000, and it just keeps going on and on. Occasionally, this isn't my typical client, but occasionally my perfect ideal client comes along. This is somebody who started their own business 30, 40 years ago. They just sold it from anywhere between $5 to $25 million. Quite frankly, they never have to work another day in their life, and they're still not at peace. They still haven't got contentment. They still haven't felt that fulfillment in life. And not only that, but this person now is wondering, who the heck am I? The last 20, 30, 40 years of my life, I've been identified as a business owner, a guy who does this. My whole understanding of who I am in the world was what I did every single day of the week for the last couple of decades. And now I'm not that. That business is no longer mine. And now I've got all of this money. Wonderful. I got the vacation home. I've got maybe a boat or a yacht or whatever. I've got all of this stuff. My kids are out of the house. My wife and I, we're good, but it sure could be better. And quite frankly, I have no idea what I'm ever going to do moving forward. And so this is who I'm working with today as my ideal perfect client. Those are the ones I really love working with.
Got it. So if somebody, I mean, you just said you covered a lot of stuff right there. And one of the questions that I always like to ask people is like, if you're stuck in that kind of situation, is where do you start? Like for somebody listening that might be going, okay, and putting financials aside, no matter where they are in life, we all go through those phases where we're stuck with something. If you're stuck in that point and you don't know, okay, I don't really know who I am right now, what's one of the first things that you could do to start with to kind of start honing that down a little bit?
Yep. Well, the first exercise that I give with anyone that I'm working with is I have them journal 2 questions. And then they come back to me and say, we evaluate what did they write down, and then I start chatting with them about it. But here's the 2 questions. They're journal prompts. The first question, who am I? The second question, why am I here? And what I mean by that is, why am I on this planet? What's life all about? And so that's where I start. And that's where I started when I was struggling and trying to overcome all of my fears and anxieties and overwhelm and my search and quest for more and more and more, and comparison with myself to others and their journeys. No matter how fast I seem to grow, it seems like they were exponentially further along and all this other stuff. And it wasn't until somebody talked about during a journal prompt of who am I and why am I here? And I have since journaled that question at least once a year, every single year. But in the early days, I journaled like once a month, every month, or once a quarter, every quarter, the answers to those questions. And Eli, the most exciting thing is how my understanding expands when it comes to my belief of who I am and what life is all about. It shifts as I go along. But it has to start somewhere. No, but most people I have discovered, most people have never given thought to having an answer to the 2 questions: who am I here? Who am I, and why am I on this planet?
Oh, I'm sure. And I can imagine, do you have people that come back to you and they're just like, I don't know how to answer that question, or they're like 3 words because they're looking for the short answer just to answer something because nothing's coming to them. Do you have that happen quite often?
Absolutely. And it depends on who the person is and what their system of beliefs are about the world. It will depend on where I take them in that discussion. And so it's always a powerful discussion, and there's a lot of incredibly awesome places that someone can get to and get some clarity for them, at least at this season of their life, with a decent grounding and understanding of who they are in this moment. The most important thing is most people write down, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a business owner, I'm a fill in the blank. It's the things that I, you know, consider myself. And that's perfectly fine to start with. I think that life gets really interesting when you see that there's something well beyond those labels.
Mhm. Right. And trying to think of how to ask this question. Let me come back to this one because I'm trying to think of the right way to put this into words. You're If somebody comes to you and they're stuck in that situation and they can't figure out what that is and what is that next thing, is like, okay, so the answer of who am I, a lot of times you just brought up the fact most people identify by the labels of their specific surroundings. How do you get them to go deeper on that? Because I know I've asked that question sometimes, even of myself. I find that it depends, it ends up being that surface level. But sometimes when you ask somebody that next level question, it's like, okay, what, it's beyond I'm a dad or I'm an entrepreneur or those things. How do you get people to dig deeper? And what are some of the things that they might come up with once they get to that?
Well, the answer to that question, Eli, is that it depends on who I'm speaking to and where they are and what their mind is open to. I can tell you right now that the average client that I work with, what sometimes I will do is ask them if they would spend the weekend and read a book called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And specifically, what I would point them to focus most of their time and energy on is their thoughts related to the opening line. It's before you get to agreement number one, which is don't take anything personally, I think. But anyway, before you get into the four agreements, there's this section called the dream of the planet. And once they are exposed to the idea of the dream of the planet, and that everything that we think and believe was all just made up by somebody who came before us, and we've made agreements with their thoughts and ideas, and those thoughts and ideas have been handed down for generation to generation to generation, then all of a sudden it's like, wow, wait a second, maybe I'm something more than my beliefs, more than the thoughts in my head about who I am. Maybe there's something beyond the doing in this world. Maybe there's something about more along the lines of being. Who was I before I knew my name? Who was I before I knew that I was an American? Who was I before I knew I was a boy or a girl? Who was I before I knew that I was a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or whatever? Who was I before I knew that, I believe this or that? Who was I before that? And the answer is we existed even in physical form before we had any of those labels thrust upon us, and also where we made agreements. And it's like, so if I was before I had all of those beliefs, then who was I then? And it gets very interesting. One for me, Eli, I'm at a place in my life where the answer to that question might simply be something along the lines of, I'm a divine spiritual being here having a human experience.
Nice. That is going deeper into the conversation that I think a lot of people just don't spend the time thinking about, and I love how you've put that into place. So that question that I was kind of hanging out on earlier, um, when somebody starts going through this process, and as an example, they've put themselves into that situation of defining who they are for, especially like as their business. Okay, it's because so many of us that are entrepreneurs, our life is a lot around our business, and how do we figure out that above and beyond is like, okay, what am I outside of this thing? And finding, I find that like you and I talked the other day, and you were talking about the problems that you have today are just going to be bigger tomorrow from that standpoint. But let's look at what are your thoughts on that work-life balance, which is one of the things that I think for me personally, I feel that that's I think it's a myth, because I think it's just harmony. It's like, how do you work together on both sides of that? How do you approach that concept?
Yeah, so I'm going to see if I can find work versus play, and I'm going to read to you something that really resonates with me. And it says this: the master of the art of living makes little distinction between his work and his play, his labor and his leisure, his mind and his body, his education and his recreation, his love and his religion. He hardly knows which is which. He simply pursues his vision of excellence at whatever he does, leaving others to decide whether he's working or playing. To him, he's always doing both.
No, I love it. That is great. That is awesome. Repeat again where that came from.
I do not know.
Okay.
If you just do the master in the art of living quote, I'm sure that it's probably out there. Matter of fact, I can do this right now and do a search for it. How's
All
that?
right.
So, master of the art of living quote. And does it say? Um, James A. Meichner. Thank you.
All right.
I
Cool.
will now put that in my note along with that.
It's
Because
always a good idea to have that stuff, because everybody's like, where did that come from? Yeah.
Yep, James A. Meichner, whoever he is. I've heard that several times. But yeah, that's for me. I don't actually ever think of work-life balance. I just think of life.
Hmm.
And when I'm in a conversation with you, Eli, you and I are the only two people that exist on this planet. This conversation is the only thing that is important to me in this very moment. I fully am invested here, and whatever I'm doing next, whatever that may be, whether it's along the expectations of how I designed my day, or if for some reason I choose to allow something else to take priority over something that I thought was earlier going to be my intention for the day, whatever I do next is it is my experience of life. And to me, as long as I'm enjoying and I'm satisfying, for me, let me share with you another thing. I believe, and this comes, I believe, from gosh, it was, what's his name? Earl Nightingale, I believe.
Okay.
Yes. And this is from what was the audio program? Gosh,
The
it
Strangest Secret.
thank you. The
Yep.
Strangest Secret. Earl
Great program.
Nightingale. So he said it can be defined by success is a person who is doing what they're doing because they intentionally chose to do it.
I love it. I
So
love that.
my question is, I don't care if I'm working or playing or whatever. My question is whatever am I doing? Am I doing it because I intentionally chose to do it, or am I doing it because somebody else told me this is what I should do and I'm falling into line with what they believe my life should look like?
No, and I love the way you just phrased that, because we do live, especially with the rise of social media, we live in the world of, oh, well, this person is doing this, so I need to do that, or these are the things that are going to make me successful, which a lot of it is, it's just fluff.
Well,
And we've come to find out a lot of times these guys are like, they don't have the things that they're promoting out there. So then it becomes a falsity altogether. And so I love that it's just whatever you intentionally make it is your success.
yeah, and so you mentioned something there in passing that the idea that something will make me successful. I will be successful when.
Hmm.
And to you'd have to have a different definition of success other than the one that I just mentioned, which, by the way, have whatever definition of success you desire. It's not important to me that you guys all out there listening to this choose to have mine. But here's what I can tell you, Eli. My business could absolutely fall apart. Every client could decide to abandon me. I could actually fail miserably to ever find another client. I could get behind on all of my bills. I could actually have my house foreclosed. I could actually end up owing the federal government hundreds of $1,000s in back taxes. I could lose everything and be homeless, and I still would be successful. As long as each day and each moment of that day, I'm still doing what I intentionally chose to do, given what my current situation and circumstances appear to be.
Yes, I love it. Very well said, my friend. Awesome. Okay. So as we're starting to wrap up here, I'm going to have a few questions for you. One is, let's give one takeaway, one action step that people can take right away that's going to get them more clarity behind that next step in their journey.
Yeah, let me give you a couple of steps. The first two are going to be obvious. Number one, open up a journal, whether it's physical, digital, does not matter to me. Write the question, who am I, and come up with an answer. All right. Number two, open up a journal and I want you to write the question, why am I here? And however you want to discern what that means for you, just answer the question, why am I here? Now, the third one, you could do it in a journal if you want, but typically most people usually get a pad of paper or whatever. And at the very top of it, I would encourage you to write the title, 50 Things I Want. And on the left-hand side of that page, I want you to write from top to bottom, 1 through 25. And then flip the page over and do 26 through 50. And then here's what you do with this page. You're going to set a timer for 2 hours. It may take you all of 2 hours and you may struggle to get this finished in 2 hours. But the question is what do I want? And anything and everything that comes to your mind, write it on this list of 50 things. Here's the caveat. You cannot ask, is this possible? You can't allow yourself to filter, what would people think of me if they knew that I wanted this? You can't think, is this selfish or conceited? If it came to your mind when you asked the question, what do I want? You have to write it down. All right. So do that. By the way, the average person gets to about 20 or 30 and they are stumped. And the whole reason is because we've all been conditioned, most of us have been conditioned by the world to stop wanting things, that it's selfish and it's arrogant and who am I and all this other stuff. But trust me, there's a reason why you might want to force yourself to come up with 50 things because they're in there. It's just for many people, they've been suppressed for a very long time. Now, once you finish that, grab another. By the way, this is all step 3, which is the 50 things I want exercise, but this is a next portion in it. The next thing you do is get a separate sheet of paper and put my top 10 dreams, and then write 1 through 10 on the side. Now, it's not important at all that any of these be in order, but what you want to do is you want to write down what are the top 10 things out of these 50. Which of these are important enough to make it to my top 10? Don't worry about it in order. And as you're doing this, if something new comes up to your mind that wasn't on your list of 50, go ahead and put it on your top 10 because that's where you thought it should be, and add it as a 51st or a 57th item on your list. All right. So now you have your top 10 dreams. Now flip that over and type in at the top, put my top 3 goals, and then top to bottom, 1, 2, and 3. Now, these are going to be in order. You're going to look at your top 10 dreams and say, which of these is the most important to me? Put it in slot number 1. Now, flip the page back over. You got 9 remaining items. Ask, what is most important to me out of these 9? Put it in number 2. And then out of the remaining 8, put the most important one in slot number 3. Now, not only do you know who you are, why you're here, you actually know what your top 3 goals are over the next 1, 2, 3, or 5 years.
Awesome. Great exercise. So for everybody listening in, stop, rewind, and just take a few minutes to actually do this. Well, okay, take a couple hours to go do this because it is going to probably take that long. Awesome. Great stuff. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out. This has been amazing, which I knew it was going to be. We're going to wrap this up with 2 final questions. So the second to the last question here, this is the Meet Cool People show. So what do the words meet cool people mean to you?
Meet cool people. Well, number 1, it means that there are people out there that you have not yet met. So I like the idea of meeting the people you haven't yet met. I like cool people because they're better than meeting jerks, I guess. Although I don't think there's anybody who's truly a jerk. They just sometimes get called into a habitual pattern of jerky things. But yeah, meet cool people. I think it's the whole idea of there's a lot of value in understanding that there's something that you can give and gain from every person you meet on this planet.
Awesome.
And maybe others, who knows?
Definitely. I love that. I love that so much. Awesome. Okay. So final question. People are going to want to hear more. So what's the best way that they can get a hold of you?
Well, if you go through these things that I just shared and you struggle with your belief systems, and trust me, some beliefs will come up if you do any and or all of those exercises. I have a talk that I do as an opening keynote to my annual conference called Free the Dream. It's called All Beliefs Have Consequences. This 1-hour talk, if you watch it, it will literally change your life forever. I can promise you, after 1 hour, you'll never be able to think and feel about the current experience of life that you have right now the same. It is that transformative. You'll learn what a belief is, how you got your beliefs, how to discover the ones that are limiting you, what the source of those beliefs were, how to disassociate from them, and how to empower alternative, empowering beliefs that will get you a different experience of life. It's available for free at mindsetanswerman.com/free.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Thank you so much for sharing that with everybody. I know it's going to be good. You and I had a pretty deep conversation last week. So you guys are in store for something really good. Go download that. All right. So with that, Cliff, thank you so much for coming and hanging out today. I appreciate you coming and spending the time sharing your knowledge and your wisdom with us. And with that, everybody get out there, have an amazing week. And that wraps up another Meet Cool People show. Now, if you like what you heard, be sure to give us a like, subscribe, or review so I can help introduce these amazing cool people to even more amazing cool people. And just remember, meeting cool people is just the beginning. You need to have a system in place to follow up with the amazing people that you meet. This is exactly what we do for our clients. If you'd like to see if my team and I can help you, go to followuprockstar.com and check out the case study video to see exactly how we're helping our clients turn casual connections into cash clients for life. Again, go to followuprockstar.com and we'll see how we can work together to turn you into a follow-up rockstar.